Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sean LaFlock. I'm with Scotty Hagnes. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how you doing today, man?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Very
Just got
cool.
back from a ride, so nothing better than that.
Oh, man. So you picked back up on riding not too long ago, right? Like
Yeah, it's
rewriting
been
again.
about April now, yeah, but
Yeah,
I've been on it pretty heavy since April, so it's nice learning to the point I've got everything back, learning a lot of new skills now and progressing, so it's
yeah.
pretty fun.
It's very interesting how, like, when you pick up on things and you bring it back full circle, how certain things kind of click, and then you'll be amazed that, I guess, how something that you thought you've mastered, you can have a whole different layer of understanding with some of that stuff. Do you feel me?
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, I've definitely learned things about myself and just general bike control that I never knew in all those years I rode in the past. And I definitely think I learned a lot of things out of putting my physical direct focus somewhere else, and then some of the learnings out of training for CrossFit or the gymnastic strength work or the mobility work and bringing it back in, and it's pretty impactful.
Yeah, that's pretty darn cool, and and I saw a picture of you the other day, riding through the decades. How long have you been riding? How long have you been riding now, Scotty?
I think 34 years. I actually got started kind
Wow.
of late. I didn't start till late 1982.
Yep.
But I've ridden continuously ever since then, though much slower between 2008 till 2015, only sporadically through those years.
Yep.
But I'm riding about as many days per week as I ever used to. Just the sessions aren't quite as long, just
Yeah.
life and stuff. But I ride only a few minutes away from the gym, so it's pretty easy to get that
Yep.
in as a training session.
Yeah, it kind of falls into suit with a lot of like the way I guess Olympic sports are. How beginning on in the career of athletes, they need a lot more volume, and then as they get further and further along, they need a lot less touches, just because you've accumulated so much volume over time that you need very little to kind of keep what you have. But you need those big breakthroughs to kind of continue on through to progress in the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one thing I noticed is that I assume it's a central nervous system thing and maybe lowering the glycogen or something. But
Uh-huh.
early on, like my skills would only hold out for a certain length of time, and then there's just an obvious point where your skills and timing and coordination kind of drop off, and it
Mm.
hit much quicker than it ever used to. Though I was really sharp when it was good, but now that I've been doing it for longer months, that I can hold that I stay sharp for much longer now. Maybe pretty much back like before. So that was interesting adaptation.
Yeah.
It progressed fairly linearly, actually, just the ability to stay sharp longer.
Yeah, it's actually, I think it was about a month ago. I saw a pretty cool video of Tony Hawk, who was turning 48 years old that day. He went into his own private facility where he has a half pipe, and I think he was trying to throw like 1100 or something. No, it was
The 900,
the
which yeah,
900. Yeah, it was a
which he originally
900.
did, yeah.
Yeah, which he originally did like 20 something years earlier. So he spent like a good 45 minutes just continuing to grind and grind and grind. And then he just hits it. And then he just takes the stuff off and just drives away. But it's an amazing thing that, 48 years old. And as we're progressing older and older, we can still do some of those things if we just want to throw it out there every once in a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if you maintain your body well enough to
Yeah.
still have the relative degree of function it used to have, then I think the skills are still there, especially if you keep your head in it, and I
Yep.
think I've never believed I'm old. That's why it shocks me that I'm turning
Yep.
50. I
I
don't
know.
think I never have changed my mindset from when I was young on like things I can physically do.
Yeah.
And I think when you start thinking, oh, I'm too old for that, I mean, that's when you run into troubles.
Yeah, it's an amazing thought. Actually, I was thinking about that the other day. So last week we had spoke. I tweaked my back later in the day. Just messing around with some power cleans, and I think it was like a day or two later. I'm like, man, it's like this is what it's gonna be. Is this kind of it? Like I'm just gonna kind of get tweaky and injury, and then you get old and you can't do this stuff anymore. But I mean, I refuse to believe that. And I look at people around me and I look at someone like you who's continuing to progress in certain things, but not only progress, but also hold on to certain things for upwards of 30 something years. So I definitely, it's just a mentality. I think if you buy into the idea that you're starting to get old and you can't do things, I think the body just falls suit. So I definitely think there's a
Mm-hmm.
huge mind body connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a small sample, but there are a handful of other guys in my sport of BMX that still ride and have ridden, and now that they're pretty much everyone says it's like the the magic pill for youth. And none of these guys look old. None of these guys
Yeah.
move old. They don't think old. So I don't know whether it's chicken or the egg, maybe, but
Yep.
definitely you do see it. And I'm sure there's some other sports out there that are kind of like that.
I definitely think holding on to the skill sets is something that you can do for a prolonged amount of time. I think advancing in the current spectrum of what the sport might be is a lot more difficult because they're the prerequisites that you have. So, I always believe that you can always, see further when you stand on the shoulders of a giant, right? So every time, every generation that comes around have a baseline of skill set that is far superior than the generation prior. So just think, Tony Hawk threw a 900 when he was like 20 something years old. The guys who are 10 years old watching that, they're like, man, I want to do that. So they practice, practice, practice. And by the age of 13 years old, they can throw a 900. Then the next thing they want to do is a 1080. And then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, that's their mountain that they have to climb. And then the kids that are coming up. And it's amazing. It's the reason why I think world records are constantly broken, every generation or so, because you see what is capable. And then you're like, wow, I like what I see. But then I'm going to go ahead and take it to the next level. So I think
Mm-hmm.
holding on to some things is definitely doable. I think, at advanced ages, getting to what, very youthful and,
Yeah, you're probably
it's a
not
little
going to
different.
see some guy in his late 40s like push cutting edge new.
Yeah,
You can
exactly.
definitely still progress, but
Yeah,
not like the big, groundbreaking.
exactly. Which is
Yeah.
why I see someone like professional surfer Kelly Slater can win like 10 world championships. He can win into his 40s. He's not going to be throwing any tricks that you've never seen before, but the consistency that he's built over, decades of practice, any given day he can go out there and throw that stuff, and if you don't have your best stuff, he's going to win. He knows he can
Yeah.
do that. So it's a pretty amazing thing, and I think it's really, really cool to kind of examine, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, in addition to that, we were talking last week about some liver glycogen storage stuff through heavy training cycles, and I was going through a relatively heavy training
Yeah.
cycle, and I was in a deload week, and it was, again, beat down physically, psychologically, tweaked my back later in that Wednesday when we had spoke, and then the rest of the week I took off. So that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I might have done like 10 minutes of rowing. I got some soft tissue work on Saturday. But by Monday, getting back into the gym, I was like fired up and wanted to train. And again, I think it's something that we so often see that people are like, oh man, I don't want to train, but I have to push through this. It's like, well, number one, are you doing this for a living? Okay. Number
Yep.
two, if you're not doing this for a living, um, can you take time off? And if you can't take time off, why can't you take time off? What are you missing out on? And I think those are two things that I examined over the last like 4 days or so. And then when you come back into the gym and you're like, wow, I really didn't lose that much and I feel great. I think that's one of the biggest payoffs as a coach that we have to kind of get across to our clients and athletes, that you can't just smash it all the time and we have to take some time just completely out of the gym.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So important to kind of restore just baseline levels. All
Mm,
kinds of things get elevated. Some things are elevated, some things are suppressed, and if we train hard or all the time, then that becomes your new baseline. But that isn't
yep.
really feeling or performing your best. And I know I think one of the coolest feelings is when you're just so eager to get at
Yeah.
training or whatever it is you're doing, and that kind of shows that uh, you are recovered and restored, as opposed to doing it because you feel you have to, or you're going to lose something if you don't do it,
Yeah.
or dragging your ass basically to train. That's a pretty good sign that you might be a little overextended somewhere.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the things that we, as athletes, kind of beat ourselves up about because we're like, well, if I'm not training, I'm not getting better. But like, you got to think of it this way: if you're not training properly, you're not getting better either. And if you
Yeah.
get hurt, you're definitely not training. And the incidence of injury as you're overreached are going to be extremely high relative to where you are when you are fresh. And we've talked about this before, but like, I always know when I'm going to get hurt. In the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm beat down. I don't really want to train, but I'm doing this anyway. And then you get that tweak, lower back for me. But the two things that I've realized over this last 2 weeks in hindsight is, one, the amount of lack of sleep and disturbance that starts to pick up, and my lack of desire to train. When those two things start to like be conscious kind of things, that's when I know I got to start backing off from training and just not even do recovery, like active recovery stuff, because that just turns into training for me. Literally just get out of the gym and for a prolonged amount of time. I think that's kind of where my best flow kind of goes with.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's best for many because it's like you said, a lot of people will turn recovery sessions into things that just add fatigue rather than
Yeah.
help remove it.
You do
Yeah,
like a
and so, oh, go ahead.
you do like a 20-minute mobility session and then like 30 minutes on the bike. And, oh, I just did some sprints at the end because I was feeling good. Like, like you can't even give them the keys to the car to drive because they don't know how to not put their fifth foot on the pedal and just smash it.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
So we'd spoken a little bit about some nutritional strategies to sleep better, and how did that end up going for you? Did you get a chance to play with that?
First thing I did was I started upping the fruit content. So I am big into starch, but I did more fruit, and then during my training I do Gatorade just to keep my blood sugar good and kind of replenish, and then afterward I'd do another Gatorade because usually I do dextrose with my post workout shake. So I would do a Gatorade as I either was coaching or later in the day. And I just felt much more restful toward the end of the day. I wanted to go to sleep like at like 10:15, whereas other times the cortisol just spikes up and you're like, I really have no desire to go to bed. But now over the last like 5 days or so, I'm like, I need to go to sleep. And then like I'd get a good 8 hours of restful sleep, wake up at about 7 o'clock after going to bed about 10:30 and be ready to go. Wake up, good morale, want to train, want to go out and interact with people. So one way or the other, you're going to get to the point where you have to stop training, whether you're going to get injured or you're going to choose. And I hopefully in the future am going to decide to do it willfully and not have it brought upon me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Well, it's good. Yeah, good to hear that helped. And I've seen that, experienced it many times. Just a little more fructose,
yeah,
top off that liver glycogen. You sleep a lot better.
yeah.
Sleeping better equals better recovery.
Yeah, and we'll see if I keep that integrated into my regular regimen, if I don't succumb to that stuff as easily and become a little bit more resilient, being on top of that and not worrying about, oh, well, am I going to put on a little bit extra weight because I'm drinking so much Gatorade, whatever. But like if you're in a training cycle where you need to really do that, then do it. And if you're training to look that way, why are you training to look that way, and why are you training so hard anyway? So you can't have both ends of the spectrum most of the time. So I guess
and in general, I mean, I've having experimented with nearly anything. I switched to did a very high fructose, high fruit diet for a while, a couple of years back. And if any, I actually lost body fat.
Yeah.
I did not put any on.
Yeah, I think.
So,
were you doing what kind of training were you doing at that point?
it would have been kind of a base prep stuff, so aerobic stuff.
Yeah.
Some long stuff, but some more intense, and then lifting, and so usually 2 days of kind of more traditional strength training, and then I had one day I was doing primarily Olympic lifting.
Yep.
And the days were separated.
So maybe some threshold intervals in there and that kind of stuff. With some
it would have been either rowing or cycling thresholds, probably longer stuff, 10 or 20 minutes kind of blocks at that.
Yeah, along with some cardiac output stuff.
Yep. Yeah, 1 or 2 days of that usually.
And then you were augmenting that with a bunch of higher fruit kind of stuff.
Yeah, I was doing lots of juice and lots of fruit and not a ton of starch actually.
Yep.
Again, just experimenting, but I'd really, definitely didn't gain any weight. Actually lost it and leaned out a bit.
Yeah.
So
definitely makes sense. I mean, when we look at how the body works in terms of liver glycogen being a primary source of fuel during these aerobic efforts, I think that's really important. And it makes sense that you were able to kind of sustain the training that you were doing, but also how did you feel outside of training during that time?
I was really good. That was kind of the end of my, I had been starch heavy, prior to that, after a few years after kind of going away from the low carb. And that was kind of the kicker. And that was actually like libido was actually the absolute highest during that stage.
Oh, okay. And what else happened during that time, Scott?
That was during the time that my son was born. So this whole time I had a newborn baby, but I was sleeping good and all this was going on,
Yeah.
So it was not exactly a prime time for that sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think there's research showing that the typical man's testosterone falls after they have a baby. it was definitely not the case for me.
That's
So
great. So I guess like, we could start putting together some of the pieces to the puzzle when you have different training protocols, what you need to prioritize for your nutrition as well. So speaking of which, I think we were talking a few weeks ago about some of the basic training protocols through Joel Jamieson's stuff, and I know you were working with some coaches as well. We had kind of delved into getting some baseline measurements of your general aerobic fitness. We talked about a little bit, I think, about the methods that you would figure out where you are, HRV, some basic heart rate testing,
resting heart
resting
rate
heart rate, um,
mm,
and we got a bit into the cardiac output method, I think, a little bit, where we had those
yeah.
longer training sessions, road work 2.0 type stuff. Did
Mhm.
you have you? I know we did a bunch of stuff like that. You have an interesting way of going about it as well that you not only use with me, but a lot of your other clients. And you mind sharing that with us, like how you kind of integrate it where it's a little bit more, we call it flow, I guess?
It's for the cardiac output. Yeah, having been a big proponent of, kind of mobility based movements. So I'm not talking about stretches or smashing, that sort of thing, but more movement work on the ground, things people might be familiar with from like Ido Portal. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of folks nowadays teaching this sort of thing, the FRC Kinestretch type stuff. So I
Mm-hmm.
would integrate pieces of those into these cardiac output circuits. Usually you need a sustained length of some cardiac modality just to get your heart rate to a certain level.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you can very easily sustain it through various flow work. It takes a little experimentation. There's certain things are not vigorous enough to keep it up, and some will actually spike you up into the threshold range fairly
Yep.
easily. And so it does require some pacing, but you can kind of get a lot done, more done at one time than just plodding away for an hour on the Airdyne or something like that. Certainly
Yeah.
makes it a lot more interesting if you can do a circuit. I mean, there's countless things, but I mean, I'll just throw something just purely off the top of my head. Would be maybe something like Airdyne, 30 calories, 10 Cossack squats,
Mm-hmm.
pivoting into a lizard lunge on the end of each of them, and then some sort of quadrupedal movement, like say a crab walk with the hips held high, and then possibly a bar hanging movement for shoulder girdle mobility. So
Mm.
side to side swinging back and forth or something like that, and then back to
Yep.
the Airdyne and multiple rounds of that, or a couple of rounds of that, and then a couple of rounds of some other circuit that maybe you're rowing instead of the Airdyne, and now instead of the Cossack, maybe you're doing some sort of a shoulder roll. I mean, anyway,
Yeah.
tons of potential options there.
Absolutely, and I think it throws a whole different complexity when you do something like that. It stimulates the nervous system. It gives you that ability to open up some of the joints and the kind of that kind of thing based upon some of the other training sessions. But more often than not, it kind of allows you to look forward to the training session and not see 30 minutes Airdyne and just be like, oh, like I
Yeah,
just don't want to go and do this.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
and if I can do it with kind of a little more laser precision too, you can kind of look at what was done in the training. I'm assuming if a session like this is happening the day before was probably a pretty hard day. You can
Mm-hmm.
look at what movements were in the training session, and then what things might we need to do to potentially compensate for that.
Yeah.
So if there was a lot of gripping, which lots of movements have tons of gripping, maybe we want to ensure that there's some sort of crawling movement or ground-based movement that's going to kind of open up that wrist joint.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say there was no hip rotation, which we don't have that in hard lady movements we would typically train. So
Mm-hmm.
then that's where you'd want to get some 90-90 shin box Cossack type work. You can move the spine in different directions that it
Yep.
normally moves, so you can kind of look to undo some of the things that were the body was loaded with the prior day or days.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you had mentioned, on one heavy training day and then a lighter training day. Is that something that you integrate into your programming? These high-low days. I know we did some of that when we were working together. But you mind explaining a little bit of that?
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely something I've shifted to over the last few years. Is kind of the high-low concept that kind of comes first from legendary track coach Charlie Francis.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of the most famous for that, though I'm sure it's been employed in lots of methods. The idea is basically that if we try to train what we think is hard all the time, by very nature, we're actually training kind of a moderate place where we're not really getting the best results possible because you're not
Mm-hmm.
able to go as hard as you truly are capable of going, but you are certainly going hard enough to add quite a bit of fatigue. So it's kind of this middle ground. So the concept is that your high days, you're going to be rested and you really are going to go very hard, whatever that is for the session, whether that's a lift, whether it's speed work, whether it's high metabolic output, whatever it is. And to do that, maybe you're even doing doubles on that day. You're maybe doing quite a large amount of training on that day. And then on an easy day, it should be very easy. It should feel easy, and it allows the body to still build a work capacity doing these easy movements, but then recover from the high day so that you come back to your next high day fresh and able to hit it hard again. So there's definitely a very kind of a rhythm built through your week that way.
Now, have you tried this yourself, along with it?
Yeah, I've definitely done it a lot, and I think that's been, it would be hard to go back to the old way after doing it because I like feeling fresh coming into a session I know is going to be tough.
Yep.
After training as long as I have, if I'm able to push beyond where I've been, I know it's, I must be pretty fresh.
Yeah.
But the low days it's nice to know, I just have to go ride my bike a little while today. Or I have this mobility circuit I'm going to do. And once you kind of realize the power of being able to go hard and being recovered enough to go truly hard, it's pretty convincing.
Now, we talked about one of the modalities or methodologies of some of those lower days. On the higher days, are you doing more lifting or more high intensity sprint work, or is it just a priority day, or where do you go for there?
Yeah, it depends on the person, the situation, kind of a little of all of that.
Yep.
Definitely priority days are whatever biological traits that you're trying to improve, the most important ones for the training cycle. And I like those to be, assuming Monday is coming after rest, it's going there. It's also going later in the week after a low days once you're recovered. And I like to try to group like stressors. So if I was working on speed and power and strength, those are all very central nervous system demanding. So those would probably go on that day. Possibly if I was doing real high anaerobic work with somebody, that may go that day too. Maybe a separate session.
Yep.
However, if more aerobic development was the focus, this might be the day that I would do large amounts of aerobic power work, or maybe a lot of high volume threshold work. Presently, I'm doing hill climbing on my mountain bike as on my priority high day, basically doing a bit of a large volume of that because that's the main focus. So my strength days actually become kind of secondary days right now. So depending on the person's goals, you can really shift it around a lot of ways.
And then those strength days don't necessarily become like 3x3 back squat and 90% days. They become more of a structural balance, kind of perfect movement preparation and that kind of deal, right?
They could be. Oddly enough, I actually am doing 3x3 at 90% in the squat right now, followed by some med ball throws actually.
Yeah.
But it's what it really is just purely strength maintenance at this point.
Yes.
So it's 2 days a week, and it's 3x3 on a couple movements, some gymnastics, some barbell based, and some throws and jumps. Basically, is what it is.
Yeah. And thinking about that, obviously, I used my bias going into what that training was, but. How do you, in yourself, have you been doing this, or are you still getting programmed for?
Still getting programmed for. This is actually my last active week of that. I've got the recovery week, my big ride, and then a recovery week, and then I'm going to go back into doing my own.
So how did you kind of come about figuring out that would be a good pattern for you? Was it just looking at what happened over time? Was it just feeling it out? Did you guys have a way of knowing like, wow, like we can do a big ride day and then we can do some heavy strength stuff day, and it's not going to really interfere with one or the other?
Yeah, it took some experimentation. So I've tested daily with the Omega Wave for like 3.5 years, plus some other stuff. And we look at the numbers there. And early on, I would be destabilized more by doing things like this. And I don't know if it's a greater work capacity built, or we figured out how to separate the training. And so the intervals don't particularly fatigue my cardiac system, and they don't really take too much out of my central nervous system. Via the testing, though, they can definitely for some folks. I do know that I'm a little fatigued on the Tuesday session that follows in the legs from the hill climbing, but not enough to really make a lot of difference in a maintenance session. So if I was really trying to actually push my strength, I suspect that we would have done it differently. It would probably been a cardiac output day, and then Wednesday we would hit the strength hard rather than that kind of a
Do you give
setup.
yourself almost like a high, low, low day, almost like that?
Yeah, yep, yeah. Sometimes you do take kind of two low days, but you can
Yeah.
still. And again, this is where it's relative to that person's work
Yep.
capacity.
Yep.
Someone who's trained for many years can, on a low day, can still do something that might,
Yeah.
really hurt somebody with a much lower work
Yeah,
capacity.
and because just thinking about it, like when you say high, low, low, you're like, okay, high days are the only important days. Those are the days we're getting better, but that's not the case. The low days are the volume days. That's where we're going to be working the baseline stuff, so that everything can kind of just continue to do this over time. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah,
Cool.
yes, yeah. Low day. I mean, tomorrow's a low day, but I will probably do over 2 hours of aerobic work. So, just as an example.
Okay, so that would for a lot of people seem like a tough week, let alone a tough day. But again, I think that's what we're trying to build over time. That your low day can become a 2 hour aerobic training session, and then you'll be able to come in the next day and then do heavy back squats or
And
take a
CNS
day
will be
off.
fine.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
CNS will be fine.
Yep.
But I think that also is important to that is what the standard is going to be. How do we get to that point? So you can almost reverse engineer what that's going to look like. So if you say my low training day is eventually going to be a 2 hour aerobic session, what are we going to do to get there? What are the external factors you're going to have to do? What is your nutrition going to have to look like? Are you going to be able to take that time and not have to box it in some crazy way with 6 personal training sessions, and then you got to coach classes? And I think that's what a lot of people try to do is they try to do all that other stuff and then this. And then it
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't work that way, because then by the time you get to that training session, that low session becomes a non-existent session and you're just struggling to get through it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly not, realistic, I think, in a lot of people's lives to train to do that sort of volume. There's probably no need to really,
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, obviously
it's certainly,
you have a specific goal that you're trying to work through, which is you have a long ride that you're going to be doing pretty soon, right?
yeah. Yeah. It's 2 days, two back-to-back days with about 5,000 feet of climbing. Well, actually cumulative even more than that. And, yeah,
Very cool.
yeah, looking forward to that. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that once that's done, I mean, the volume will go much lower for a
Yeah,
while. Let's kind of
yeah.
maintain things and just work on skill and get back to structural balance and some of these various things.
Yeah, that I guess we consider that a paradigm of how we slowly start to go toward like the specificity of sport, and then the season's over, and we got to get back to here where we go. Okay, now we're back into that general fitness, general health range, and then there's a time where we might push this again. But I think one of the biggest things that both of you and I experience is the want of people to stay right here all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and then they just go like this, and then they just completely
Yeah,
drop off in
fall
terms
off.
of their performance. And I know I've been victim to that because I just want to keep going and going and going, and I see everybody around me. But it really takes great coaching and a great relationship in order for you to be able to have the confidence in saying, "Listen, I know this is what you want to do, but I see, as I said before, I see the forest through the trees, and I know what is going to get you to the best place that you need to be."
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. That's it's. I tend to look forward to the different seasons of training, I think,
yeah,
and so I'm actually looking at doing some foot strengthening and some of these different things that I haven't done, and
yeah.
recover certain shoulder range of motion that's always been lacking, and so I'm going to put some focus there after this is over. And
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that you make there. That if you have multiple, I mean, I guess we say sports would be the lack of a better phrase, or just interests, I guess. Then it gives you the opportunity to periodize your entire year, and hopefully some of those things don't completely overlap. Like, oh, I really want to be good at mountaineering, and I want to be good at marathoning. It's like, okay, those are very overlapping. Some of the year you want to be like, oh, I want to work on rock climbing, and then another part of the year you want to work on biking, and then another part of the year you want to work on swimming, so that you can go ahead and get into another interest of yours that don't necessarily hurt any of the others, but actually might bolster the other stuff, because you're doing a
yeah,
huge block of aerobic training right now. You're going to get back into maybe some structural balance stuff. Your capacity to do that work is going to be a lot higher just based upon your general fitness right now. So that'll get better. And then once you get out of the structural balance and you go into something else, and you can see how from month to month, year to year, a proper fitness program can continue to not only keep you healthy and keep you that baseline, but it also kind of gets you better at anything you're trying to do.
it builds. Yeah, and the things are supportive. We're learning in so many more ways than initially thought. So
Yeah,
while
yeah,
this aerobic, very large, low aerobic base type training might seem to just benefit you have only if you're doing endurance work. Well,
Yeah,
we know, of course, it allows you to recover from much more sets of strength training, our
that's
power
right.
work, our speed work. But here's another interesting one. The more mitochondria you have in your muscles, which the
Yes,
aerobic training will develop, the
yes.
quicker the muscle can relax and shut off. So when someone is large, full of trigger points all the time and stiff and immobile, you know that these portions of the tissue are not getting proper oxygen, and
Yep.
that's partly why they are in that kind of seized anaerobic state. So the more aerobic work you do, actually, you tend to be able to relax the muscles more quickly and gain and retain mobility easier.
Yeah. And I know
So
there's
it really kind of goes full circle.
and I know there's a bunch of different methodologies of creating that stuff, but I think we probably will save that for another time. We're at the half hour mark, so
Oh yeah,
I
we
think
kind of
I think
run.
we've got a nice little precursor for what might be to come in the coming weeks here. Does that sound good there,
Yeah,
Scotty?
we'll look at how to how to uh, some other aerobic development methods that are a little more specific to the muscular level and
I think that'd be pretty cool, and maybe some of the listeners that maybe are more favoring into the sport of fitness might benefit
yeah.
from. Okay.
Yeah, this would definitely be very useful there. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Perfect. Okay, Scotty.
Yeah.
So I think that's all for the week. I'm Sean LaFlock. You can get me at Sean at CrossFitDelray.com.
And I'm Scott at CrossFitPortland.com.
Beautiful. All right, Scotty. Have a great week, man.
All right, Sean, you too.
Take
Take
care.
care.